Hello friends, for today's video I wanted to go through a list of epic fantasy standalones. I know that epic fantasy standalones sounds in a way like an oxymoron and it can feel like an impossibility, but a little while back in doing a more community-oriented video, somebody said that they were craving more epic fantasy standalones, which is understandable given that a lot of the times when we get a standalone, it's much more contained, oftentimes it's more fairy tale or cozy feeling, and I absolutely recognize that a lot of us want the high epic feel of a story, but we maybe don't always have the time to dive into a 10 or 15 book long, or sometimes multiple various different series within an overall series. We don't have the time always to jump into those kinds of stories. We want the feel of epic fantasy, but a little bit more contained. I was working through if I felt like there was anything out there that even fit the bill for this, and I had to first ask myself what even would fit the criteria of epic. So I'm going to specify that first, and then we'll get into the various different book recommendations that I think fit those specifications. In order to be on this list, the books don't have to have every single piece of criteria that I have listed out, but they should at least have a couple of them or most of them. So getting to what those specifications are, first off, we have incredibly high stakes. Also, we want themes typically that are a little broader in scope. I think part of what makes epic fantasy so sensational to a lot of us is just what it can accomplish and how it can speak to societies at large. I am a huge character-driven reader. I love when we actually get to see how people process things, work through things, their motivations for things, and I don't think that something can only be epic fantasy if it's not character-driven. I think actually the two can go hand in hand. You can have things that are incredibly high stakes for the environment, the society, the world, and then you can also see how those stakes affect individual characters, or basically you are following this high stakes world through some really well-developed characters. I'm not saying that these two things can't exist at the same time, but I do think that if something is a little bit more personal and doesn't reach the epic status within its stakes and its themes, then it tends to lean more so into the cozy and the fairy tale. We also want these stakes to elaborate a little bit. When we talk about them being high stakes, they usually are going to involve all of the citizens of a various area, whether it's a city or a country. I think within a single book, it's hard to have an entire planet or solar system or something like that, but the stakes should be affecting more than just our protagonists. As for some world building details, we tend to want these to be just a little bit more fleshed out. We don't want them to feel like a backdrop. Part of why I think a lot of people come to epic fantasy not only are the high stakes, but also the ways in which it feels as though there is an entirely different world that we are being shown. This can come in the form of the architecture, the culture, the religion, the magic system, but there has to be a world building piece that makes us feel transported to a different world. This also can include really far-reaching lore, or it can include the practices of the people. And then last, it doesn't have to be a story that includes a cast of characters or multiple perspectives, but that definitely helps in being able to feel all the repercussions of all the various things I just said. A lot of times the characters, if there's multiple perspectives, can be vehicles for showcasing different kinds of magic, different kinds of religion, or you can be showing the different cultures in different countries. So it helps to have multiple perspectives, though this one is not necessarily required. All that said, jumping into it, we're going to kick it off with Race the Sands by Sarah Beth Durst. When I started this book, and I've said this basically every single time I've brought up Race the Sands, I did not think that it was going to reach the level of stakes that it did. I also just didn't expect myself to become all that invested in this story, and the more it built, the more I enjoyed it. But when I very first started it, before I started it and then right when I first started it, I was unsure, and the further I read, the more and more impressed I became with how big it was becoming. I really think it utilized the amount of time very efficiently. The setup for the story is that you're following this mother who recognizes that she is going to lose basically custody of her daughter if she is not able to attain a little bit more wealth. And so her solution is that typically in the past, she coaches people within this sport that's known as Keyhawk racing. And Keyhawks are beings that when people die, they are reincarnated, and the worst people are reincarnated into Keyhawks, and Keyhawks are then raced in these deadly races for basically the entertainment of the population. And Keyhawks are not necessarily treated incredibly well. People don't really care because they're like, you're reincarnated from a terrible person who cares at all about your well-being. But she is somebody who coaches people in Keyhawk races. This cues another character who enters the picture, which is a young girl who is trying to escape a very controlling, manipulative family dynamic. And you see as this mother character and this young girl start to form a bond. It is maternal in some ways. It's mentor-mentee, coach, and athlete. And you would think there's no way that this is going to reach epic status because it feels so personal, and it also feels pretty small. And then how this expands into the religion, the lore of the world, and also how big all of the stakes get and the threats to not just these characters, but this pretty much entire area, they're accomplished quite well. It was a wild ride. It was a great time. And if you only know Sarah Beth Durst from her cozy fantasy, just know that she actually has quite incredible world building, and that was definitely true of Race the Sands as well. Next up, we have a book that really only has one perspective, which makes its epic status, I think, even more impressive, and that would be The Goblin Emperor. This story, if you want something that truly feels like you're transported to a different world with its own customs, its own language, its own history, absolutely within this, you are going to get it. And I actually think that the way that the story plays out and just how intense the world building is really actually helps you feel connected to our main character, Maya. The setup for the story is that Maya was the son of the previous ruler. However, he was kind of a child of an arranged marriage that was really only something that the previous ruler engaged within to fulfill an alliance with the goblins. Within their society, they are not goblins. The father married this goblin woman, had this child, kind of sealed the deal on this arrangement, and then just sent them to live off on their own. So they're pretty much outcasts in every way. Maya himself, he is grieving the loss of his mother when you're first introduced to him. She has been dead for a while. He's lived in relative isolation. He doesn't really have friends. He doesn't really have family. He has basically no one, but he is a very sweet, kind, tender-hearted person. And he's also somebody who is resilient in a lot of ways, not in the typical fantasy hero kind of way where he's a really great fighter or anything like that. More so that it is his refusal to buckle to the powers around him. And where this comes into the picture and how this actually plays out in the story is that very early on, not only his father, but everyone in line for the throne before him ends up dying in this terrible accident, which now puts Maya on the throne. You can tell that everybody around him has their own agendas, their own reasons for why they want Maya to do certain things, fulfill certain obligations, or why they think he should stop being allies with certain groups. All these people are coming to him with all these problems or all these things he thinks he's supposed to do. And Maya has to sit back and ask himself, is this right? Should I go through with this? Can I trust this person? And you probably, when you pick up this story, are going to be like, oh my gosh, the names in this. Oh my gosh, there's so much going on. This is too much. But the reason I say that I think this mirrors the character so well is because that's how he feels. He's a fish out of water. He is thrown into this position. And on top of all of it, he doesn't know if the thing that was a terrible accident that killed all the people in line before him, if it actually was an accident or not. So then there's a murder mystery on top of it, which means somebody might be coming after him too. From there, we have our only middle grade story on the list, which would be A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. This story is so much fun. It is really quite darling. It is definitely middle grade or younger end of young adult, depending on where you live and how things are categorized. But regardless, yes, it's very youthful, but it is such a blast. So the setup for the story is right at the beginning, our main character, she works for her family's bakery, and there is a dead body in the bakery. And within their city, some people have magical powers, and our main character's powers have to do with baking. She kind of compels dough to take certain shapes, to rise to certain amounts, but she doesn't really have any kind of magic that she deems useful outside of her family's bakery. Regardless, though, the city is looking to find somebody who is responsible for this murder. They also currently have a culture of trying to scapegoat magic users. So right away, our main character is somebody who is seen as likely responsible for this murder. So she's not only trying to prove her own innocence, but she's also trying to get to the bottom of some things that are transpiring within the city she lives within. And on top of all of that, she's starting to realize that maybe some of her powers are not as inconsequential as she thinks. Truly, I think that this story just built and built and built the further it went. but you have such a blast along the way, and the stakes really develop much bigger than you might expect. After that, we have Warbreaker and Elantris by Brandon Sanderson. A quick little asterisk here, Sanderson has spoken about wanting to write sequels to these stories, so for the time being, they are standalones, though this could change in the future. But if he never gets around to writing those, they read as completed arcs. They read very well as standalones. It doesn't feel like you're necessarily missing out on what's supposed to happen next. So that said, if you don't know anything about Elantris or Warbreaker, I'll start with Elantris. This story, you have a character who is part of the royalty, and right at the beginning he discovers that he is sick with this illness that is going to basically ruin his entire life. So the way it works within their society is that previously there were Elantrians. Elantrians were gods on Earth, basically. But something that used to signify somebody as an Elantrian now has become this horrible sickness, where once the city of Elantris, where the Elantrians lived, was this place of glory, now is a place of basically a living hell for anybody who is showing signs of having this illness. So right at the beginning, he is showing signs of this, and he is thrust into this area, and he is just doing everything he can to survive. Part of what makes this illness so terrible is that you don't really die, but you also don't heal. So if, for example, you break a finger, the pain of that is going to stay. If you are hungry because you are starving, that hunger doesn't go away, but you don't have the reprieve of death. You just keep on going. So you are really like zombies on Earth. So you're having that perspective. And then you have another who was supposed to be his bride, the person that he had an arranged marriage with. She comes into the city right as it's discovered that he is supposedly dead, because they don't fully reveal what's happened to him to her. So now she is trying to navigate this political system that, similar to what you see in the Goblin Emperor, she is very much a fish out of water within. As for Warbreaker, you are once again looking at a marriage alliance, but it's a little bit of a twist on that, as the person who was supposed to marry the ruler of this other area, that sister, her father, who was the person that was in agreement for this marriage alliance, he just can't send his favorite daughter, so instead he sends a different daughter. And there's no actual stipulations within the alliance that it had to be the other one, whose name was Vivenna, so he sends his other daughter in her place. Vivenna, her entire life, was pretty much set up to fulfill everything she was supposed to for marrying this other person. The sister is completely clueless. She never paid attention to this because she never thought she would have to. And so now she's finding herself trying to basically survive, has no idea what she's doing, but she's doing everything she can in her power. Meanwhile, her sister feels so terrible about all of this that she decides to launch a rescue mission, but has no idea how to go about it. So both of these characters don't know what to do, and you're following them as they power through people who are manipulative, they power through people who are trying to use them for their own gain, they don't know who to trust. And then on top of all of that, you have another perspective that enters the picture, who is basically a god on Earth who rejects his godhood status. There's more to it than just that, but that is kind of the fun of Warbreaker and its world building, is getting more into that. And then you have another side character that shows up here and there, who seems to know way more about everything that's going on. He seems to have completely different motivations than everyone else. He also seems to have a lot more knowledge about things than anyone else does, and you're trying to figure out how he fits into all of this as well. And then last for today, we have Sword of Kaigen. This story is very emotionally heavy. When it first starts, I think will probably feel like the tone is a little odd. And also, when we talk about fantasy, I think a lot of us have this impression that it's not going to feel very modern. And when you first start this story, you hear about the rest of the world and you're like, wait, what? Because it doesn't feel like what a lot of us are accustomed to in our fantasy world building. It feels very, very contemporary. But as the story builds, the more that the magic is revealed and the more that the nuances within their society, and specifically the propaganda within their society, you start to see that how it has shaped their entire culture. Not only that, but also the risks that come with trying to resist against that, and just how difficult it is. So within this story, you have two main characters. You have a mother character and her son. And the mother definitely has a deeper understanding of the repercussions of trying to resist against propaganda, and how she has basically been forced into confinement and forced into a certain role. And she's starting to see her son, his eyes being open to all of this. And she is proud and terrified of him having all these revelations. Story, I think, perfectly encapsulates what I was saying before about just because the stakes can be very, very big doesn't mean that we're foregoing really fantastic character development, and the ways in which those epic stakes can trickle down into these individuals. It really showcases that incredibly well within Sword of Kaigen, devastatingly so. It's a fantastic story. I'll add that the author's other work, Blood Over Bright Haven, you could also categorize as epic fantasy standalone. This one is very brutal. A less likable main character in Blood Over Bright Haven, but I think that the author's writing itself has gotten even better. I think that the pacing is even better. The world building is really, really fascinating. And both of them, I think, fit the label of epic fantasy within a standalone story. If you have any of your own recommendations, please feel free to leave those in the comments down below so that anybody who comes to this video doesn't just have these, but yours as well. I'll have all the ones I mentioned in the description bar in case you'd like to check them out. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.